Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bondi, welcome. Congratulations on your nomination. I'm so glad that you've been nominated, as we discussed when we had the chance to meet.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure to work with you as a State Attorney General for a number of years, and I'm delighted to see you here today before the committee. I look forward to your confirmation. You will be confirmed. I, too, have taken note of the number of times you have been asked about weaponization of the Department of Justice as if it was a theoretical possibility that might happen in the future. One of my colleagues on the other side said, weaponization may well occur under your tenure. We all know that weaponization has occurred like we've never seen before in American history under this administration. And I want to get even more specific. In the last 4 years, this administration has carried out an unprecedented attack and campaign against people of faith. If you look at the numbers, we've never seen anything like it before in American history. It has been one of the most disgraceful chapters in the history of the Justice Department and in the history of the FBI. And I hope that you will reverse this and do right by every American citizen, including especially people of faith. Let me give you some specifics. After the Dobbs case was decided by the Supreme Court, over 100 pregnancy care centers and over 300 churches in this country were attacked, vandalized, firebombed. Do you happen to know off the top of your head how many prosecutions Merrick Garland's Justice Department brought in those cases?
I do not, Senator.
It's a stunning number. It's 2. Hundreds of churches, hundreds of pregnancy care centers. And I might just add, these pregnancy care centers, the attacks on them, which were violent, which were gruesome, were egged on and encouraged by rhetoric from members of Congress, including members of this body, who have said that pregnancy care centers aren't real medicine, that they're not real doctors. They have legitimized these attacks. And the same thing was true of churches. And this Justice Department couldn't lift a finger to defend these Americans. But at the same time, they used legislation, a law known as the FACE Act, to prosecute at least 53 different pro-life demonstrators, including people like Mark Houck from Pennsylvania, to whom this Justice Department sent a SWAT team to his door in the early morning hours. He has, I think, 7 children. In the early morning hours, an FBI SWAT team shows up at his door to take him into custody and prosecute him. By the way, he was acquitted. This kind of outrageous, disparate treatment has to end. So here's my question to you. Will you protect churches and pregnancy care centers when they are targeted for violence, when they are targeted for intimidation, when their members or parishioners are threatened with violence or other acts of illegal behavior?
Yes, Senator.
Will you stop the disparate treatment of Americans on the basis of religious faith?
Yes, Senator.
Will you stop the deliberate persecution of pro-life Americans for nothing more than their pro-life beliefs?
Yes, Senator.
Will you ensure that nothing like the Mark Houck case happens again, that Americans do not have SWAT teams arriving on their front doors with armed weapons to terrorize their children and their spouses, only in the end, of course, to have the case lost because there was nothing to it? Will you put an end to that kind of deliberate intimidation of the good American citizens on the basis of their religious beliefs?
Yes, Senator.
I'm glad to hear you say that because we need it. We need it. Ms. Bondi, we need a new chapter at the Justice Department, and we need it quickly. And I'm glad you're committed to it. Now, I also have heard you've been asked about your comment that you thought that in some cases we need to investigate the investigators, the ones who were bad. You know, I have to say I'm glad to hear you stand by that. We need to do that. You need to do that. And I'll give you another example. I'm sure you've read about this memo, which I now hold in my hands. This memo that was developed by the FBI field office in Richmond, Virginia, 23rd January 2023, targeting Catholic parishes for spying, for recruitment of infiltrators. I mean, the memo goes on and on and on about the FBI's plans to put assets into Catholic parishes, into choirs. This is an unbelievable, unbelievable assault on Americans' First Amendment rights, and we only know of it because of a brave whistleblower who came forward and released it to us. And I will tell you, I have never been misled and lied to like I was by the current Attorney General and the now former FBI director when they sat right where you're sitting now and told this committee, oh, we don't know anything about it. oh, only one field office was involved. It was the single work of a single field office and a very few individuals. As it turns out, that's not true. Multiple field offices were involved. Multiple individuals were involved. Under your leadership, will you put a stop to the use of FBI or Department of Justice resources to try and recruit informants and spies into Christian churches or any church or house of worship in this country on the basis of nothing more than faith?
Of course, Senator.
Let me just say this. To our knowledge, no one who was involved in the writing and performance, execution of this memo has been disciplined or fired. Will you conduct an investigation like you talked about, Ms. Bondi, that will get to the bottom of abuses like this? And to be clear, this is an outrageous abuse. It is an outrageous abuse. One of the worst abuses of Department of Justice and FBI authority in our history. Will you conduct an investigation to find out who signed off on this, who approved it, who advocated for it within the Department of Justice? Will you open the books on these abuses so that the American people can have confidence in their DOJ?
Senator, and I think what you're talking about is the ultimate weaponization, what we've been discussing all day. If I am confirmed as Attorney General, one of the first things I will do, there'll be many, but I will personally read that memo, and if Mr. Patel is confirmed, discuss it with him right away.
Fantastic. And will you work with this committee and our relevant subcommittees? I'm going to chair a subcommittee called the Crime and Terrorism Committee. We're going to do our own investigation into what happened here at the FBI and the DOJ. Will you work with us as you discover the nature of these abuses, and as you put a stop to them, will you work with us to make sure the American people get all the facts and this never happens again?
And Senator, yes, I look forward to working with you and the Democrats. I would think this is something that we can all agree on both sides, that this should not be happening in the United States of America, and work together on it.
That's fantastic. Let me ask you one other question here in my just few seconds that are remaining. This memo targeting Catholic parishes repeatedly refers to as an expert source a group called the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, the Southern Poverty Law Center has a long history as an anti-religious group that has repeatedly gone after conservative and religious organizations, called them hate groups, called them sometimes terrorist groups. They're cited in this memo. They once infamously, the SPLC called the Family Research Council a terrorist hate group, and an armed gunman came into their lobby and opened fire. Will you put a stop to the use of the SPLC as an official source for any Department of Justice memorandum or finding?
That will be one of the first things we will look at as well, Senator, and report back to you and the committee.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Noem, welcome. Congratulations on your nomination. I'm delighted to see you here. I do notice the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is over your shoulder there. I'd have to question your judgment about who your friends are based on that. The great chairman from the state of Missouri. It's fantastic to have you here. You know, the Department of Homeland Security is not particularly old, but you already have what I hope will soon be the distinction of succeeding the worst secretary in the history of the Department of Homeland Security. Alejandro Mayorkas has been an absolute disgrace to that department and frankly to this country. And I'm delighted to see you willing to step up and serve. Let me just ask you something. I repeatedly asked your predecessor when he sat where you're sitting whether the southern border was secure. And he repeatedly told me under oath, it is secure, Senator. And he repeatedly said under oath, our policies are working, Senator, meaning the Biden administration policies that, of course, gave us this devastating open border. So let me just ask you, is the southern border secure as we find it today?
Senator, no, the southern border is not secure today, but in just 3 days, we will have a new president in this country, President Donald J. Trump, and he will secure our border.
That is refreshing candor. I'm glad to hear it. Let me ask you about a young man from my state. This is Travis Wolf, who's 12 years old when he was killed just over a year ago by an illegal migrant who mowed him down, and I choose my words carefully, mowed him down in a motor vehicle, hit him head on, doing 75 and a 40, killed him. Others were severely injured. Just yesterday, a witness sitting where you are sitting today told this committee that migrant crime is, and I quote, not an actual concern. Not an actual concern. in a hearing before this committee advising us to drop the Lake and Riley Act and not focus on migrant crime. You know, in my state, with the death of people like Travis Wolf and Officer David Lee, who was assaulted and killed in St. Louis, and officers in Kansas City who have been assaulted by illegal migrants, and others who have been carjacked and stabbed, would you agree with me that migrant crime sure as heck is an actual concern and that you intend to do something about it?
Yes, Senator, absolutely. And I am so sorry about Travis and my prayers go out to his family. I can't even imagine what that is like. And thank you for telling his story, because there's so many families in this country that have that same story. And they don't understand why the federal government is allowing people to come into this country illegally and then perpetuate crimes against their people and then give them resources and shelter and food and debit cards to go take care of their families when they go to work every single day to make sure that they're providing for their families and are held accountable to when they break our laws. So,
let me ask you this. Will you work with President Trump to reinstate the Remain in Mexico program that the president had in place in his first term, which does so much to ensure that those who would seek to abuse our asylum system are not allowed into the country, and those who have legitimate asylum claims, their claims are processed in due order and in due course, but they wait in Mexico until those claims are fully processed. Will you work to reinstate that program?
yes, Senator, the president and I have talked extensively about this and will 100% partner with him to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy and make sure that it's in place.
Fantastic. I think Travis might be alive today if that policy had been in place. Let me ask you about CBP One, the phone app that I've called concierge service for illegal immigrants. I'm sure you're familiar with it. This was the Biden administration's effort to allow asylum seekers to apply ahead of time using their phones, but not actually to provide any evidence that they needed asylum. There was a newspaper report, a press report that said the only problem with the app is it never asks users, are you seeking asylum? They don't ask for any asylum evidence. They simply release these so-called asylum seekers who use the app into the country on parole. Sometimes they're never given a hearing. The Inspector General actually did a report, a full investigation report on CBP One, and found that frequently users of this app were claiming the same addresses in the United States as their intended destination, even though they didn't know each other, they weren't family connections. In other words, it has been completely abused. And the idea that the federal government would pay for this kind of concierge service for illegals, I think, is outrageous. Will you end the use of the CBP One app?
Yes, Senator, if confirmed, and I have the opportunity to be secretary on day one, CBP One will be shut down. There's data and information in there that we will preserve so that we can ensure we know who's coming into this country and who's already here that we need to go find, but also we make sure that there's another program, CHNV, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, where our federal government actually paid to fly people into this country directly from other countries without any vetting or knowing who they are. So there's several of these programs that need to be eliminated, and we need to ensure that we're following legal immigration laws.
I'm glad you just mentioned CHNV. This is this is a mass parole program. Of course, as you know, our law allows parole in only very limited circumstances. There are two circumstances, and it requires case-by-case evaluation. The present administration, soon to be gone, has granted mass parole in direct defiance of the law, not case-by-case evaluation. The CHNV program is one of those instances. Will you put a stop to this abuse of our parole law and our asylum system?
Yes, we will go back to case-by-case evaluation of these parole cases and ensure that we have more resources, if you will partner with us, to make sure that our legal immigration system is fully utilized, that we have more judges, more immigration courts, so that we can process people legally and make sure that they are going through that process rather than, like Joe Biden has done, use this as an excuse to allow people to come into our country with no consequences.
Let me ask you about another low light, not a highlight, but a low light of this last administration and DHS. Your predecessor, the current Secretary of DHS, established a disinformation board using taxpayer resources to police speech on the internet and elsewhere, to tag American citizens' viewpoints as either legitimate or not legitimate, and use the power of the state to censor them, including having them removed and perhaps penalized. This has got to be the darkest chapter, I think, in DHS's short history. He eventually withdrew the board under intense criticism, but has never fully repudiated it and never promised not to do it again. Will you pledge to us here today that under your leadership, there will never be a disinformation board or anything like it at DHS, and you will be a champion for the free speech and First Amendment rights of all Americans?
Yes, Senator, there will not be a board such as that under my leadership at the Department of Homeland Security.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you in my remaining seconds, just one more thing about the Secret Service. You've mentioned this, and I'm so glad that you did. This committee, and it has been bipartisan, this committee has done bipartisan work on the attempted assassinations, or the assassination attempts, I should perhaps say, of the former president, soon to be the future president, soon to be the president, President Trump. We were stymied at every turn. And I should use the present tense. We are currently being stymied at every turn by the current Secret Service leadership and, frankly, by the leadership of DHS, who have refused to turn over documents, who refused to make people available for interviews. We finally had to pass my own law in this committee, which we unanimously adopted, a law, a statute, mind you, which would require DHS and Secret Service to turn over relevant information to us about the assassination attempts. It's unbelievable. When you come to office, to this office, I hope very soon, will you pledge to us that you will open the books on all of the facts associated and around these assassination attempts, that you will make available to us and to the public, most importantly, all the facts so that we can ensure that this never happens again and that the needed reforms in the Secret Service are put into effect?
Yeah, Senator, if I am the Secretary of Homeland Security, I will certainly work with you to build transparency and make sure the facts are shared with you and your committee. I know that you've been very frustrated by the lack of transparency from the department, and I want to thank those of you that have worked on that report that was put together on these assassination attempts. I know it was a bipartisan report and investigation that this committee conducted, and I appreciate you focusing on that, and I will work with you to get the information so that you have the truth of really what happened there and the failures so they can be fixed.
Thank you. That's a great place to end, and a high note as I see my friend Senator Blumenthal, who did fantastic work on this effort, and it will be an incredible new day, and incredibly refreshing to have a DHS secretary who will tell us the truth, who will be honest with us about the facts, honest with the American people, and who will enforce our law. And I know you'll do that, Governor Noem. I look forward to supporting your nomination. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vogt, good to see you. Congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for being willing to do this job again. You did a great job the first time around. I look forward to seeing you back in this office. Let me just ask you, one of the important functions of OMB is the role that it plays in managing procurement through the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Would you agree with me that it is a problem? And by the way, I think 1 out of every 10 taxpayer dollars goes to federal contractors. So that's a lot of money. That's a big part of our budget. Would you agree with me that it's a problem when we are sending federal contracting dollars to entities, firms, especially consulting firms, that are simultaneously taking money from and doing business with our most lethal opponents, like China, for example? I mean, doesn't that strike you as a little strange?
That is concerning, yes, Senator.
Here's an example, prime example of this kind of behavior. McKinsey, the consulting firm. So McKinsey got, in the last year for which we had full numbers available, over $851 million worth of consulting work. They had 90 prime contracts with DOD. They got $98 million in contracts from the Army, $132 million from the Air Force, $37 million from the Navy. I think they advised on the F-35 fighter jet program and the Air Force Space and Missile Systems Center. At the same time, they had 1,000 employees in China. They were doing business directly with the Chinese government, and they advised Chinese state-owned enterprises that have now been blacklisted by our own military. Now, my view is that if they want to do business with China, I don't recommend it, but I suppose it's fine so long as it's not illegal. But I don't think they should simultaneously be getting hundreds of millions, approaching $1 billion in contracts, federal contracts, military contracts from our own government. Here's my question for you. You're going to have a lot of influence in this process through the procurement rules and process. Will you be an advocate for protecting American taxpayer dollars in this contracting process where hundreds of billions of dollars are spent every year? Will you be an advocate for protecting that and making sure it's not going to entities who are effectively double dealing and advising our enemies at the same time?
Absolutely. I'm very excited, if confirmed, getting back to being able to work with OFPP, getting a handle on the guidance that we're giving government-wide as part of the FAR Council, and to really look at what are the regulations that are in place and how can we get them better.
Great. That's great. That's fantastic. Give me a sense, just while still on the procurement topic, how you might ensure that procurement policies prioritize American-made goods and services, particularly in industries that are vital to our national security. And I just think about our experience in COVID, and you were there for the beginning, the onset of the pandemic, and when we learned that, my gosh, we couldn't, the most basic medical supplies we're importing from overseas. Our medical supply chains are so compromised in so many ways. So give me a sense, have you given some thought to how the procurement process might be used to safeguard those critical supply chains and prioritize American manufacturers?
Yeah, I think clear leadership from the director to make sure that a viewpoint from the president is implemented at the level of policy that the OFPP is reviewing. A lot of times in the management functions at OMB, they're kind of on autopilot with regard to the clear direction of the president, and using the president's management tools and his agenda to be able to drive that policy across the federal government is something that we fully intend to do, and to do it robustly.
Very good. Let me shift gears just a little bit, but still thinking about federal regulations. Through OIRA, you have a lot of influence, thankfully, on the regulatory landscape and environment. I asked your predecessor in this role, the Biden administration nominee, if she would commit to the Hyde Amendment and the principle that we should not be using federal taxpayer dollars to promote abortions, which has been a bipartisan commitment, as you well know, for decades. She wouldn't commit to that. And indeed, as you know, the Biden administration pretty promptly walked back their commitment to it and has been essentially violating the law, because it is the law. They've been violating it for years now. Let me just ask you, when it comes to the Hyde Amendment, which is the law of the land, will you work to ensure that all of our rules and regulations, everything that comes across your desk, is in full compliance with the Hyde Amendment, and we are not spending federal taxpayer dollars to promote abortion in any way?
As I've said, Senator, we will abide by all laws on the books.
Very good. Let me ask you just a couple more things, and when it comes to the policies of life, because again, you're going to have a lot of influence over the regulatory environment. Would you agree that federal funding for family planning through Title X, through that grant program, should not include federal funding for abortion providers?
Again, the president has made his views on abortion really clear throughout the campaign. I'm not going to get ahead of the president with regard to the budget process. We have submitted budgets in years past that give the Senate a sense of how he would budget, but I'm not going to get ahead of the president on that.
But let me ask you this, and just to be clear, what I just asked about was the Trump policy from in his first term, but here's another one. Pregnancy resource centers, should they be able to receive federal funding through federal grants? That was the president's policy in his first term. Do you think, again, as a matter of federal rules, pregnancy resource centers ought to be eligible?
Again, the president's a pro-life president. He had a very pro-life record. He had an extensive debate within the campaign at his views, and I'm not going to get ahead of him on the budget process, but I think the country has a good sense of where he is on the issues.
Let me ask you just one more. The Mexico City policy, which I know you're familiar with, OIRA is very important in that policy. That's just the policy, for those keeping track at home, that says that American foreign aid dollars, tax money, shouldn't be spent on abortions overseas. President Trump championed this in his first term. Every Republican president has for decades now. Do you agree with the Mexico City policy, and would you implement it if the president directed you to?
Absolutely, we'll implement anything the president's asked me to direct.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Vogt. It's great to see you again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair, I'll recognize myself. Senator Loeffler, it's great to see you. Thank you for being willing to do this job. As you and I discussed when we met in my office, I loved serving with you. You were a terrific senator, and I'm just so glad that you're willing to do this job. It's going to be a great, great service to our country. Let me just ask you a question or two to start with about the priorities at SBA. I noticed that on day one of his administration, the last president issued an executive order directing federal agencies to adopt a broad racial equity agenda. And that was particularly a focus of SBA over the last 4 years. In fact, according to one report, by far the largest program that uses racial preferences in the federal government is the 8A program run by SBA. To be eligible for it, companies had to show various racial and other characteristics in order to access funding. A federal court in Tennessee ruled it unconstitutional. Another federal court struck down a similar requirement, also administered by SBA, the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. Here's my question to you. President Trump has now, thankfully, with his own executive order, said we're going to put a stop to these DEI programs. How do you see implementing that at SBA, and will you get SBA refocused on actually helping small businesses, no matter who the owner is, no matter where they are? There'll be no tipping of the scales in order to fit some bureaucrat's agenda. We're going to help those in need, get them stood up. We're going to execute on the mission of SBA. Tell us what you'll do about that.
Senator, thank you. Thank you, and I appreciate the time we spent in your office discussing these matters. Importantly, President Trump's EO overturns a divisive and illegal DEI program that was spread throughout the government, and particularly within the SBA. This will allow us to reduce the burdens on small business for costly implementation of needless programs. But moreover, I think the best way we can serve small businesses is making SBA lending available to all who qualify, as opposed to picking winners and losers and pitting Americans against one another. So you have my full commitment that we will root that out and make sure that it is broadly available to all who qualify.
That's a fantastic answer. I'm glad to hear it. And let me just ask you about another priority. While the last administration's Small Business Administration was focused on this DEI agenda, what it was not doing was helping people in rural areas of the country, like most of my state. In FY24, just to take one example, SBA made 103,000 loans. Only 12,000 of those went to rural businesses. That's just over 12%. Of SBA's $56 billion in capital last fiscal year, only $6 billion went to rural businesses. That's just 11%. There, you want to talk about inequity. There's an imbalance between urban and rural. And listen, we've got urban centers in my state as well. I'm all for small businesses in urban centers getting what they qualify for. But would you agree with me that our small businesses in rural America are extremely important? They are often the lifeblood of our communities, like the small town where I grew up, 4,000 people, relies on small businesses. What will you do to make sure that small business in rural America is a priority, that they're getting access to the funds that they qualify for, and we're doing everything we can to help these small businesses revitalize these communities?
Well, Senator, not only do I agree with you, I've lived it. I was raised in a family of fourth-generation small business. My nearest town had 600 people in it, and my high school had 8 small towns. Many of my fellow students' parents were small business owners. I saw the hard work that they did, the complexity of dealing with increased federal regulation even back then, and we have to ensure that small businesses in rural communities are getting the support they need. I understand it firsthand, and I know that we can do better, and we will do better, because this is an area that we can grow in terms of, you know, bringing manufacturing made in America again can come back, driven by rural America, and paying attention to people that have been forgotten about. That's what President Trump does. He remembers the forgotten men and women working so hard in this country to make it work.
Fantastic. Well, I welcome your focus on this. I look forward to working with you. Let me ask you just about fraud and waste and abuse, and you've talked about this some. I think your answers have been very heartening. You remember, in fact, you referenced it at the height of the pandemic. Congress enacted the so-called CARES Act to provide very necessary relief to millions of Americans. We also, at the same time, created, however, a special inspector general to monitor any fraud and abuse in that program. Now, for reasons that continue to elude me, the last administration, the last president, when he came to office, almost immediately limited the remit of this special inspector general, then tried to effectively defund it. And now we find out hundreds of billions of dollars were wasted or fraudulently dispersed or not properly paid back under these programs. Would you agree with me that we need the Special Inspector General, SIGPER? We need that office to be properly funded. We need it to be given the jurisdictional authority that it deserves. Senator Ernst has a bill to make sure that SIGPER gets that jurisdictional authority. Would you support that? And can you talk to us about the need to be rooting out fraud and abuse and corruption?
Absolutely, Senator. If I'm confirmed, I look forward to working with this committee to have a higher standard of accountability, to act with more urgency, to have a zero-tolerance policy with regard to fraud, and to making taxpayers whole. We have to get back to that accountability and getting those funds back into taxpayer hands as soon as possible.
Very good. Thank you. And now I'll recognize Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. Congratulations, Senator Loeffler, on your nomination, and thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Patel, welcome. It's great to see you again. I enjoyed our conversation in my office a while back. Let me ask you this. Is it appropriate for the Federal Bureau of Investigation to attempt to recruit spies or informants into religious institutions in this country, particularly Catholic parishes? Is that appropriate?
I don't believe so, Senator.
Mr. Patel, are you familiar with the recent actions of the FBI in this regard, including this memo that I have right here, making a list of Catholic churches and parishes that they regard as potentially suspect and directing the potential recruitment of informants and other spies, let's be honest, into those parishes?
I'm familiar with that memo, Senator.
Mr. Patel, would you commit to me that you will, if you are confirmed, that you will finally and officially withdraw this memo and make it clear that this is not only unacceptable, but that it is an absolute violation of the First Amendment that every American enjoys under the Constitution of the United States?
If I'm confirmed, Senator, yes.
Will you also commit to me that you will conduct an investigation and find out who wrote this memo, who spread this memo, the field offices involved in this memo? Because I can tell you, we've had your predecessor sit right where you're sitting, and he has repeatedly lied to, there's no other word for it, lied to this committee. He told us initially that it didn't happen, that the FBI didn't make any lists of churches. That's not true. We have it. A whistleblower brought forward the list for us. He said then that only one field office had worked on it. Turns out we know from another whistleblower, multiple field offices worked on it. He said that it was never posted on the internal system. It turns out it was. We believe it's still in effect. Will you find out who was involved in this gross abuse of Americans' First Amendment rights? And will you discipline them? And if you possibly can, will you fire them, Mr. Patel, consistent with department policy and law?
Senator, you have my commitment to investigate any matters such as this one that are important to Congress. I will fully utilize, if confirmed, the investigative powers of the FBI to give you the information you require and also to hold those accountable who violated the sacred trust placed in them at the FBI.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and I'm glad you use the word sacred trust, because that's exactly what it is. The FBI is the most powerful law enforcement body in this nation, arguably the most powerful law enforcement body, at least in a free nation in the world. And to have this body corrupted politically such that it is targeting people of faith in this country and then lying about it to this committee and the American people is unimaginable. I'll be honest with you. I never thought this would happen in the United States of America. I just didn't. If you had told me 5 years ago we'd be reading memos like this, I would have said, no way, that's bad fiction. In fact, it's a horrible reality. The department needs to be cleaned up, the agency does, and rights restored and protected. I'm glad to hear you say that. Let me ask you this. Do you think it is appropriate for the FBI to be sending agents, including counterterrorism agents, to the parents of children who went to school board meetings and asked about critical race theory in their schools, asked about the school's masking policy during COVID? Should those parents be treated as domestic terrorists?
Parents who have the courage to ensure their children are taught what they feel is right, and those who have the courage of their convictions to go houses of worship, in my book, will never be domestic terrorists.
I'm delighted to hear you say that. You're familiar, I am sure, with this memorandum issued by the Attorney General, the last Attorney General, Merrick Garland, directing the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to look into parents who went to these school board meetings. And we know from whistleblowers who've come forward to this committee and given us the evidence that, in fact, the FBI opened multiple cases against multiple parents across the nation, I believe, including in my home state of Missouri. Another gross abuse, incredible political power brought to bear against everyday citizens. Why? Because they went to a school board meeting that they're paying for and asked about what their kids were being taught. Once again, I can't imagine, I couldn't have ever thought this would happen in the United States of America. Will you find out who was involved in this policy within the FBI, who agreed with it, who implemented it, who encouraged it? Will you find out that, Mr. Patel? Will you do an internal investigation? And will you make clear that those who supported this policy are appropriately disciplined? And will you make clear that the FBI will never do something like this again?
If confirmed and pursuant to your congressional request, absolutely, Senator.
Thank you. Let me ask you this. Do you think it's appropriate for the FBI to target people of faith particularly those who hold pro-life convictions, do you think it is appropriate for the FBI to single out and target people of faith in order to discourage the exercise of their First Amendment rights?
There can never be a targeting by law enforcement just based on their people's faiths.
And yet, under this last administration, the FBI and DOJ together brought numerous prosecutions under the FACE Act for nonviolent protests. President Trump has recently pardoned some of these folks, but it also includes individuals like Mark Houck from Philadelphia region, from Pennsylvania, who had an FBI SWAT team arrive at his door in the early hours of the morning, armed, of course, terrorizing him and his children, took him into custody. They charged him with a FACE Act violation. Why? Because he took his young son to a peaceful demonstration outside an abortion clinic. When his young son was shoved to the ground, he defended him. Mark Houck was acquitted by a jury, acquitted. Nevertheless, the FBI used their full resources, including a SWAT team, to try and terrorize him. Meanwhile, how many churches that were firebombed or pregnancy care centers that were firebombed, how many of them were protected by the last administration? Just about zero. It is an unbelievable instance of targeting. Mr. Patel, will you end this targeting? If you get to the FBI, if you are confirmed, will you end it? And will you make clear to all agency personnel that there can be no targeting on the basis of religious belief, and this will never happen again in the United States of America, at least not under your watch?
Senator, if confirmed, and it speaks to an issue we were talking about earlier, there will be no such targeting if I'm confirmed as FBI director. And the resources of the FBI, which are funded by the American taxpayer dollars, in the 7 minutes that you and I have been talking about, 2 people have died from fentanyl overdoses. 1 person has been shot to death in this country, and 3 people have been raped. The resources of the FBI will go to that mission set and that mission set alone, because America deserves a better brand of justice, and I'm going to give it to them.
Fantastic. Here's my last question for you. Do you think it's appropriate for the FBI to try and pressure the largest technology corporations in the world, the most powerful corporations in the world, social media companies? Do you think it's appropriate for the FBI to pressure them to censor the political speech of everyday American citizens to try and violate the First Amendment? Is that appropriate, do you think, Mr. Patel?
No, Senator.
Will you put an end to this, Mr. Patel, if you are confirmed at the FBI?
Senator, if confirmed, I will work with Congress to expose any corrupt activities the FBI has participated in, especially involved in the censorship of free speech.
Because we know from the court cases that have been brought across this country, and we know from the voluminous factual finding that was done, and it's in the record, that the FBI and other agencies of this government under the last administration pressured, coerced these social media companies to censor speech of everyday Americans on a range of issues, from the Hunter Biden laptop to COVID, to the Dobbs decision, you name it, they tried to censor them. The Constitution doesn't permit the government to do it. The FBI tried to get the social media companies to do it. Will you end this practice, Mr. Patel, once and for all?
Senator, I will always follow the law. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal is next. I want to say when he's done, so let's see, the 30-minute break would make it about 12:25 or something. I expect you to be back here on time, and I'm going to have Senator Lee. I'm going to go open the Senate up now. Will you chair for me? Okay, thank you. Senator
Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kennedy, welcome. I enjoyed our conversation last month in our office. And thank you for remembering, as you did again today, my uncles who we talked about, Morris and Lauren and Jean, who all have recently passed away from Parkinson's, grew up in a farm family. That was kind of you to remember them. So thank you for that. Let me start by asking you a question about children and the safety of children. President Biden's administration, his HHS, issued a rule, so it's binding, requiring that every doctor in America, including pediatricians who receive any kind of federal funding, so that's anybody who takes ACA funding, anybody who takes CHIP funding, this is almost every health provider in America, requiring them to conduct gender transition and gender so-called affirming procedures. So that means hormones, that means puberty blockers, that means surgeries in some cases. They imposed that rule on doctors across the country. This has been litigated, and it has been actually stopped by a couple of courts who found that it was way outside of HHS's jurisdiction. My question to you is, will you rescind this rule that imposes this radical policy and talk about being anti-science, this radical policy on just about every pediatrician in the United States of America.
Yes, I will. And by the way, that rule is anti-science. The most thorough meta review on gender-affirming care has come out in the Cass report, which reports really catastrophic impacts on children. And that is science. It's a meta review of all the existing scientific studies. But, even more just from a common sense, if you're a patient, do you really want somebody performing surgery on you who is morally opposed to that surgery? It doesn't make any sense. We need to embrace diversity in this country. There are people who believe that's important. I respect them. We should hear them out. We should debate. We should have a congenial conversation. There are also people who believe that it is an atrocity, and they need to be listened to too. And we need to embrace diversity and make room for diversity in this country and not force people to do things that are against their conscience.
And let me just point out that on this rule, what's particularly pernicious about it is we're talking about gender transition surgeries, gender transition care on minor children. This rule purported to preempt all state law. So in states like mine and many others, where the voters have said, we don't want gender transition procedures performed on minors, the Biden administration attempted to use federal money and force pediatricians to do it anyway. So I'm glad to hear you say you'll rescind that rule. I think it's terrific for the safety of children.
And Senator, I would add that we don't let children drink. We don't let them drive an automobile because they have bad judgment. They are flooded with hormones. Their brains are still in formation. Their sexuality is still in formation. To allow them to make judgments about that are going to have life-changing, forever implications for the rest of their life at that age is unconscionable, particularly in light of the Cass report.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Let me ask you a question about NIH research, if I may. I know this is something that you care a lot about. Under the first Trump presidency—
And I do want to add that people who have gender differences should be respected. They should be loved. And loving them does not sometimes love means saying no to people.
Let me, on NIH, under the first Trump presidency, HHS stopped new NIH research that involved human fetal tissue from elective abortions. Now, you were asked about this sort of tangentially yesterday by Senator Cantwell, and I want to get your quote right. You said to her correctly, you said stem cell research today can be done on umbilical cords and you don't need any fetal tissue, which is correct. My question to you is, will you reinstate President Trump's policy that ensures that no federal research and no federal tax dollars is conducted on fetal tissue taken from elective abortions?
Yes.
Fantastic. Let me ask you just about Title X. You were asked about this yesterday too, and I think I understand your answer. I just want to be sure I've got it crystal clear. Title X, which prohibits the funding of the use of federal taxpayer funding for abortions or to flow to entities like Planned Parenthood that perform abortions or refer people to abortions. You were asked yesterday if you would support President Trump's rule that says no Title X funding for those who perform abortions or refer people to abortions. I think your answer was yes, you would reinstate that rule. I just want to be sure I'm right about that.
Yes.
Fantastic. Last point that I have for you. On mifepristone, the chemical abortion drug, you said yesterday that you would study its safety. I think that's good. I want to make an additional point here just about how the Biden administration changed the rules on mifepristone that I hope that you'll take into consideration, because you pointed out— I'm almost done, Mr. Chairman. You pointed out that we need to honor the wishes of voters and states and their right to set life policy. I just point out that the Biden administration's rule on mifepristone, which they did after the Dobbs decision, means that in any state, including ones like mine, where voters or state legislators say, we don't want abortion performed after a certain point, if the Biden administration rule on chemical abortion stands and you can mail in these abortion drugs without a doctor visit or referral, that means no state ban, no state decision, no voter decision is going to matter. We're going to have a one-size-fits-all policy set here in Washington. I hope you'll take that into consideration.
I will implement President Trump's policies.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Command, thank you for being here. Nice to see you again. Let me just say this. The last 4 years have been, in many ways, absolutely hellacious for students on our college campuses. You had the last administration which issued federal rules, binding regulations that required our college campuses to put biological men into women's locker rooms. You've had multiple universities claiming the mandate, claiming the cover of the Biden administration, forcing women to accept biological men in women's sports. And so you've seen young woman after young woman denied basic safety in their changing facilities, for heaven's sake, basic safety in their dorm rooms, not able to play college sports. Now, I'm delighted that a federal court finally struck down this Biden administration rule back in January, just over a month ago. And President Trump issued a clear, strong, unequivocal executive order saying that Title IX will be enforced according to its terms, which is Title IX protects women's sports, it protects women on college campuses, no more men in women's locker rooms. This is a huge victory for common sense and the rule of law. My question to you is this: a number of universities, including some very prominent ones that love to call themselves elite, have said they're not going to follow that executive order. They're going to keep having men in women's locker rooms. They're going to try to get men in women's sports. What can be done to ensure that these colleges comply with the law and that women are safe on campus and that women are able to play sports without men interfering?
Well, certainly, I agree with you that I was very happy to see that those restrictions on Title IX vacated, so that we are really back to what Title IX was originally established to do, and that was to protect sexual discrimination. And women should feel safe in their locker rooms. They should feel safe in their spaces. They shouldn't have to be exposed to men undressing in front of them. I think I heard one person the other day say, well, the guys just should hold the shower curtain in front of them so that they aren't exposing themselves. I mean, really, that's just not what we should be doing. We want to make sure that Title IX, which is the law, is enforced. And we need to uphold that.
Will you investigate those universities that are not complying with Title IX, that are not complying with the president's executive order? These universities are absolutely getting federal funds from this department, the department that you're going to run if and when you are confirmed, and I believe you will be. Will you investigate those universities and give them an ultimatum? Either they need to comply with the law, they need to follow the law of Title IX, they need to follow the rules issued by this administration, your department, or no federal funding. I mean, will you make sure that the law is enforced?
Yes, we will make sure the law is enforced.
Very good. Let me ask you about...
The senator will suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the hearing room. Members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts its business. The senator will resume.
Don't worry, Ms. McMahon, it's me, it's not you. It's all right. That effect. Let me ask you about something else that's happened on our campuses in the last 4 years, the wave of anti-Semitism that we've seen, particularly after October 7th with the attacks on Israel. Shameful attacks on Jewish students, Jewish American students, Jewish students from overseas. We have seen the most unbelievable pro-terrorist propaganda. And again, these universities taking federal money, getting federal funds, not protecting Jewish students, permitting encampments, permitting violence in some instances, attacks on students on their campuses. The president has issued an executive order on January the 29th on measures to combat anti-Semitism, and he directed the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to open Title VI investigations into a number of universities, including Columbia, Berkeley, Northwestern. Will you enforce the law, Title VI to the hilt, and will you make sure that Jewish Americans are safe on our campuses, for heaven's sake, and these crazy students who are committing crimes, breaking windows, smashing into buildings, trapping Jewish students in libraries? Will you make sure that this stops on our college campuses that are getting all of this federal tax money?
Absolutely, or face defunding of their monies.
Very good. And let me ask you about something else. For students who have come to this country on a student visa, and as you know, that's a lot of people on our college campuses. For students who are here on a student visa, who have threatened their fellow students, threatened Jewish students, who have supported terrorist organizations, who have broken our law by trespassing or vandalism or acts of violence against Jewish students, will you see that those students, that their visas are revoked and they are sent home and they're not allowed to stay on our campuses under cover of our laws, committing crimes and threatening our own students? Will you return some common sense to our campuses in this way?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the hearing room. I'm not sure it's going to matter, but I'm going to remind members of the audience that disruptions are not to be permitted while the committee conducts its business. Please show people the regard you would have them show yourself if you're in this role. It may seem trite, but the rudeness of people who are trying to squelch others as they're trying to communicate in an incredibly public forum is just amazing, amazingly bad. With that editorial comment, I then go to Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bhattacharya, congratulations on your nomination. Thank you for being here. I enjoyed getting to visit with you the other day. Let me just start with the subject that you and I visited about, and that I also asked your soon-to-be boss, Robert Kennedy Jr., about when he was sitting right where you are, and that's the use of abortive fetal tissue in NIH-funded research. I asked now Secretary Kennedy directly if he would reinstate President Trump's policy that prohibits abortive fetal tissue research in NIH-funded grants. He said that he would. Let me just ask you the same to make sure we're all on the same page here. Do you support that policy? Will you prohibit the use of abortive fetal tissue in NIH research, NIH-funded research?
Senator, I'll absolutely follow the lead of Secretary Kennedy and President Trump on this. Just very quickly, may say why it's so important that we have alternatives. Because during the pandemic, I would often be on Catholic radio, and people would ask me whether the mRNA vaccines were made or developed with fetal stem cell lines. And I had to say yes, and they had a lot of the folks who were calling in had ethical objections. In public health, we need to make sure the products of the science are ethically acceptable to everybody. And so having alternatives that are not ethically conflicted to fetal stem cell lines is not just an ethical issue, but it's a public health issue. We need to make sure that everyone is willing to take the kinds of progress that we make, and so I'm absolutely committed to that.
Very good. Thank you very much. And I think it's a tremendous point that it is not only an issue of moral principle, although it is an extremely important issue of moral principle in the first instance, but it is also a public health issue. We think about millions and millions of Americans who are understandably very concerned about the components, if you will, of many of these palliatives and vaccines, and we want them to be able to access this on the same basis as others. So thank you for making that point. Let me ask you about something else that your soon-to-be boss, Secretary Kennedy, has said recently, that he has talked about his concerns that NIH is working to advance, in some instances, Big Pharma's bottom line rather than the health needs and health interests of the American people. And he recently wrote in the Wall Street Journal that he wants to propose stopping NIH funding going from researchers who have conflicts of interest, who have a financial benefit with a Big Pharma company. Can you comment on that? Do you support that effort? And can you comment on the importance of making sure that what we're doing with our NIH funding is prioritizing the health of Americans, not the profit of any particular corporation?
Senator, I think the transparency in conflicts of interest is fundamental to trust in science, and I'm absolutely committed to making sure that transparency is at the center of the work supported by the NIH. I also commit, Senator, to, and I mentioned this earlier, to supporting research on products that are already off patent, that don't necessarily have a drug company behind it, but that could have potentially enormous benefit for treating chronic diseases or preventing chronic diseases. I think the NIH ought to be doing research in support of the public good, not just parochial research in support of a few companies.
Fantastic. I think that's so important to restoring the sense of credibility and trust that the American people, frankly, have lost in the NIH and much of our public scientific apparatus because of the financial conflicts of interest, because of the prevalence of Big Pharma, but also because, and you and I discussed this as well, what happened during COVID-19. And I just want to ask you about that in my remaining moments here. I had the opportunity to question the author, or one of the co-authors of the now infamous Proximal Origin paper. Dr. Robert Gary is the individual who I had the opportunity to question. He wrote that paper on March 17th, 2020. You probably remember Doctor, this is the paper that infamously stated, and I'm going to quote it now, that the SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a manipulated virus. Under questioning by me, Dr. Gary admitted he actually had no knowledge of that at the time. He wrote that in March of 2020. He had no evidence to suggest that was the case. This was, in fact, a piece of purist propaganda. He has since had many of his research products withdrawn from peer-reviewed journals because he hasn't followed appropriate peer-reviewed standards. This effort, this propaganda effort, and that paper, as you remember, was used as the basis of government-directed censorship to those in the scientific community, like yourself, to millions of ordinary Americans. The net effect of this was a tremendous loss in confidence by the American people in the NIH and in our public health officials. You and I have discussed the vital importance of restoring some of that credibility. Talk to us about how you see going about doing that.
Senator, that episode is a low point in the history of science. The top officials of the NIH abused their position to hide support for research that may have caused the pandemic. And I commit to making sure that all of the activities of the NIH, not just backwards, but going forward, are transparent and open to the American people and to Congress. That's vitally important for the future of the NIH and for the future of science itself.
Thank you, Senator Hawley. And now,
Secretary Kennedy, different subject, on a different subject. You and I have talked before, when you've been before this committee, and you and I have talked in person a number of times about mifepristone. I just want to follow up with you because since the last time you were before the committee and the last time you and I spoke, there's been a major study by the Ethics and Public Policy Center of 865,727 prescribed cases of mifepristone abortions, chemical abortions, between 2017 and 2023. Have you seen this study? Are you familiar with this? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, I am.
You will remember then that this data shows the biggest study on mifepristone done, I think, ever, and it showed that nearly 11% of women experience very serious adverse health effects, to include sepsis, hemorrhaging, infection, of course, emergency room visits. Now, by the way, that's 22 times higher. That rate is 22 times higher than the FDA's current label, which says it's just 0.5, the incidence of serious adverse health events. So my question to you is this. You previously testified to the committee that you would do a top-to-bottom review of mifepristone. Mifepristone is subject to a REMS currently. You have said you'll do a top-to-bottom review. Do you continue to stand by that, and don't you think that this new data shows that the need to do a review is in fact very pressing?
I think the new data, first of all, it validates the CAS study, which is previously probably the most comprehensive data that we've seen on it, and it is, and it's alarming, and clearly it indicates that at very least the label should be changed. I've asked Marty McCary, who's the director of FDA, to do a complete review and to report back.
Good. Do you have any sense of timeline, Mr.
I
Secretary,
do not.
with that? It will be a top priority, though, for you. Is that safe to say? You say that it probably indicates the label needs to be changed. Do you think it's also important as part of your review to consider whether it's necessary now to put back in place the long-standing safety protocols that always accompanied mifepristone until the last administration? In-person dispensing, doctor visits, screening for ectopic pregnancies?
I know that Marty McCary will make a recommendation. I feel that the policy changes will ultimately go through the White House, through President Trump.
But you'll make a recommendation based on the data?
Yes.
Good. On a different subject, talking about the advertising that is routinely done by pharmaceutical companies, you have been a longtime critic of direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. You wrote, I think, in the Wall Street Journal a little over a year ago about the need to revisit guidelines around pharmaceutical advertising. Is that still your view? I mean, has your view changed?
Pharmaceutical advertising is particularly insidious because, commercial advertising has some level of First Amendment protection, not as great as political speech. It doesn't have the kind of strict scrutiny applied to political speech. It still has a level of protection. But pharmaceutical advertising is unique because if a company is advertising, for example, Coca-Cola, the consumer has a choice to whether to buy it, and then he's spending his own money on it, so he's got skin in the game. With pharmaceutical advertising, the consumer's purchasing the product, and it's usually the most expensive form of the product, so that they're usually advertising because they want to bury the existence and the availability of generic drugs that are much cheaper and equally effective. And the consumer is spending not his own money, but most often our money, taxpayer money. Furthermore, the pharmaceutical ad is getting tax deductions, so we are funding it.
I want to ask you just about that. Under current law, pharma companies can deduct their advertising costs as a business expense. Do you think it's time to change that?
Yeah, and I've actually have a call into Scott Bassan about that, but I'm working very hard on this issue, and we expect to come out with a policy within the next few weeks.
Well, let me propose that we work together. Today, I'm introducing legislation to repeal the tax deductibility of these advertisements. It is a bipartisan bill with Senator Shaheen on the other side of the aisle here. It is a bicameral bill with both the Democrat and Republican sponsors in the House of Representatives. And my view is it's time to get rid of these tax breaks for these companies and to end this practice. Can you support that?
100% support it.
Fantastic. I look forward to working with you on that. All right. Let the record reflect I'm giving up Senator Hickenlooper 15 seconds.
I assume Senator Sanders will also support that.
Absolutely, and I'll go further. The idea you
This
want
is coming out of your time now, John.
The answer is yes.
All right, Senator Hickenlooper.
Back.
Time has expired. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, good to see you. Welcome. Congratulations on securing the border in a record amount of time. The last administration came and sat where you're sitting for 4 years and told us it couldn't be done, it couldn't be done. The border was just an intractable problem. It would take years to do it. You did it in the space of really 30 days, and now the United States southern border is secure. So thank you for your tremendous work on that. I want to begin, however, with the situation in St. Louis, which I'm sure you're aware of. On Friday afternoon and evening, major storms ripped through the St. Louis area, as well as southeast Missouri. I'm going to put a picture up over my shoulder here. An F3 tornado cut right through North St. Louis. This is what you're seeing here is pretty typical, I'm sad to say, of the damage. We lost 5 people in St. Louis. We lost another 2 in Scott County, which is down in southeast Missouri, there to the south, a couple of hours south of the city. I spent much of the day yesterday just walking these neighborhoods and talking to residents, and this that you're seeing over my shoulder is what these neighborhoods all look like. These are areas that families have lived here. In some cases, I talked to one individual, one gentleman, and he said that his family had been there since his great-grandmother came to that neighborhood in 1919. So it's that kind of a community, and they are totally devastated. Yesterday afternoon, my governor requested an emergency disaster declaration to expedite FEMA funds to help the state just clean up. I mean, just clean up the kind of rubble now that you're seeing behind me. You've been a governor until very recently. You know how important this is. Can we get your help to expedite the consideration of that request? Again, it was just made yesterday. We need it as quickly as possible. Will you help us expedite that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've spoken with your governor and did that day that this devastation happened. And so we've promised and pledged to get that expedited as soon as possible for him so he can have the resources that he needs to respond to his people. And that's one of the failures that FEMA's had in the past, is that people that incur this kind of damage and lose everything, then they sit there for months, sometimes years, and never get the promised critical response that they think or that they believe they should be getting from the federal government. And that's why President Trump believes that this agency needs to be dramatically reformed.
I'm glad to hear you say that, and you're exactly right. We've had the situation in Missouri in years past where we've had individuals who have qualified for FEMA aid, including individual assistance. In some cases, they've been awarded the assistance, and then FEMA has come in and clawed it back, or never paid it out, or never sent teams to help. So to have your commitment to expedite this is tremendous. That will be welcome news to the residents of St. Louis. We also have, the state has pending 3 requests for major disaster declarations from earlier storms. We've lost over a dozen people. Well, actually, if you count the folks we lost just on Friday, we've lost almost 20 people now in major storms just in the last 2 months in Missouri. It's been a terrible spring for us. Here again, can I ask for your help? Will you commit to helping for those 3 major disaster declaration requests that are pending? Will you help expedite those, Secretary Noem, and get those in front of the president, get those approved? We are desperate for the assistance in Missouri.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
Make
you.
sure the application gets to the White House as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you. And can I also have your commitment that if and when the president approves a major disaster declaration for this storm that just happened on Friday in St. Louis, will you expedite as much as possible FEMA individual assistance for those who qualify for it in the St. Louis area?
Yes.
And I want to tell you just how important that is, because as I toured these streets and walked and talked to the residents, what I heard over and over is many of these folks don't have insurance.
Yeah.
You know, many of these folks, they either got their homes from a family member, or they bought them from a family member, so they don't have a mortgage on the property, and therefore they don't have homeowners insurance. So, as you know, having been a governor, in many instances, FEMA assistance is going to be the only assistance that they're going to get. And I just had a hearing in this committee and our subcommittee, Senator Kim and I, last week, where we talked to major insurance companies who routinely scam people by refusing to pay out the full policy awards that they are due. So I know we're going to be fighting that in Missouri. We've got to have the federal government where there's individual assistance that people qualify for. We've got to have people be able to get that. Otherwise, we're never going to be able to rebuild these neighborhoods. Yeah. So you just committed, I think, to expediting that. I appreciate that. Thank you for your help in all of this. And then the last thing we'll say is can you commit also to making sure that the FEMA communication with the state and with individuals is open, is clear, is transparent? You referenced the fact that FEMA is notorious for giving bad information, for slow walking residents, for confusing intake forms that nobody knows how to fill out, for not getting back to people. Can you commit to, as we deal with this disaster in St. Louis and others around the state, that under your leadership, FEMA is going to act with expedition, they are going to be clear in their communications, and they're going to follow up and give people the awards that they need if they qualify for it?
Yeah, that's been the biggest challenge of FEMA in the past, is just the delayed response. People are counting on the assistance and it never comes through. And the paperwork is too complicated for an individual many times to complete on their own. They need help and assistance. So that's part of the reforms that the FEMA Review Council will be undertaking. And we've got people that are frontline responders across the country that are serving on that council. And we'll take your insight as well. But we'll continue to expedite what we can with the framework we have in front of us, but do better diligence than the last administration on how we take care of people.
Fantastic. Everything you said today is going to be very, very welcome news in St. Louis and the rest of Missouri this morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Senator Fetterman.
Thank you.
Now I recognize Senator Hawley for 5 minutes of questions.
It's great to see you again, Administrator. Would you like to get a word in there? I'm happy to allow you to actually finish the sentence. Go ahead.
I'll rest my case. Thank you.
Probably wise. Let me ask you about something that's happening in Missouri that's very important to us. As you probably are aware, we've had very significant tornado damage across the state, including in St. Louis. I was just on the ground there for most of the day on Monday, walking the streets, talking to folks in neighborhoods. The damage is very, very extensive. We're going to need help across the board, and I'm asking you because one of the most important services, I think, that SBA provides is disaster relief, often in the form of loans to businesses that have been affected by natural disasters. Can you just talk to us a little bit about the nature of those loans, of that program, and what, for instance, my constituents might be able to get help with?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator. And your constituents in Missouri and frankly, the entire region that was impacted are in my prayers. And our team is already on the ground in that region to ensure that we are part of, while we're not a response agency, we're a recovery and resilience agency, and we are going to be there for your constituents. First of all, in fiscal 2025, as you know, the disaster relief funds ran out. And it was a great surprise to Congress that this agency did not alert this committee or others that they were running out of disaster relief funds. Under my watch, that will never happen again. And right now, we are making sure of that by ensuring that we do fraud checks. We've already caught about $75 million in attempted fraud that should have gone to survivors of disasters. We're streamlining our programs to ensure that the regional offices work with our disaster relief folks, which had never been done before. The agency had broken the regional and disaster response efforts apart. We're also looking at the first 100 days of President Trump's loan volume to ensure that that's being delivered quickly. For example, in California, we delivered $2 billion in relief within the first 100 days, already surpassing what was delivered in all of Biden's last year. So we are on top of it. We have 400 disaster assistance specialists in the field right now, servicing dozens of disasters across the country, and we will be right there alongside of you to ensure that your constituents are served.
That's terrific to hear. I know that homeowners who are located in a declared disaster area are eligible to apply in many cases for SBA personal property loans, which I think go up to $40,000, and SBA real property loans, which can go up to $200,000. I can just tell you that's going to be very, very important relief for my constituents. We're really suffering in Missouri, all over the state, to be frank with you, but most recently, particularly in the St. Louis and southeast Missouri areas. So I'm glad to hear that you're making this a priority. Thank you for the reforms that you have enacted to make sure that there is funding available, that you get those teams that specialize in this on the ground. I know we'll want to see them in Missouri. I realize that a lot of this depends on a major disaster declaration. That's what opens up a lot of this relief and on the SBA side and makes it available. So we certainly hope FEMA will act on that very, very quickly. But thank you again, and I look forward to working with you to bring relief to the people of Missouri. We're in a lot of need right now.
Thank you, Senator. We'll be there.
Thank you. It's great to see you again. You're doing a great job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
How you do, sir?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, good to see you. Thank you for being here. You're leading the FBI at a very critical time for that agency and also a critical time for our country. And I want to start by talking to you about the tide of violence that we have seen, ideological violence against people of faith, particularly Christians. You just think here, take a rough catalog. Just in the last couple of years, we've seen shooting at the Covenant School, Christian school in Nashville. We've seen school shooting at the Annunciation School. We've seen church shootings multiply. We've seen acts of crime and violence, vandalism, arson against churches and parishes all across the country. And then, of course, last week, Charlie Kirk, who said, "I want to be remembered for my courage, for my faith," was shot on a college campus. Let me just start with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Is the FBI, and I appreciate the tremendous work the FBI has done in this investigation, is the FBI investigating the Kirk assassination as part of this broader pattern of anti-religious, anti-Christian violence?
We are investigating Charlie's assassination fully and completely and running out every lead related to any allegation of broader violence, and we're producing results on that we'll disclose when appropriate.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. Let me just ask you a few questions about that, if I could. Sure. Reports have suggested that the FBI is investigating a broader network of groups that may have had some knowledge of the shooter's plans. Can you give us any details on that, following up what you've already said in public? How's the FBI working to find other potential accomplices, folks who may have known about the shooter's plans, folks who may have encouraged him? Any update on any of that?
So in terms of what we do for an interrogation perspective, we go and reach out to the family and community immediately. And we've conducted those investigations and interrogations with local law enforcement, and we're continuing to do that because those closest to the suspect are going to hopefully know the most about the suspect and his beliefs and his ideology. On top of that, unfortunately, it has been leaked that there was a Discord chat, and for those unfamiliar with it, it's a gaming chat room online that the suspect participated in. So what we're doing, we've already done, is serve legal process, not just on Discord, so that the information we gathered is sustained and held in a evidentiary posture that we could use in prosecution should it be decided to do so. And we're also going to be investigating anyone and everyone involved in that Discord chat.
Okay, very good. I see the public reports that the Discord thread had as many as 20 additional users. It sounds like you're trying to run down all of that to see if that's accurate, who else may have been on that thread, what they may have known. Is that fair to say?
It's a lot more than that, and we're running them all down.
It's a lot more than 20?
Yes, sir.
And you're running all of that to ground?
Every single one.
Yeah, fantastic. Let me just turn to the broader question here of anti-religious, anti-Christian violence. Let me just give you a few stats that I'm sure that you're all too familiar with. Every person of faith in America certainly is. Major report this past year found that there have been over 400 instances of hostility against churches in the United States in the year 2024. Those included arsons, bomb threats, shootings, and firearm incidents. Another organizational report found that there were 500 attacks on Catholic parishes alone. So that number 415, that's all Christian churches in 2024. Another organization found 500 separate attacks on just Catholic parishes since May of 2020. Of course, we have the Covenant school shooting, the Annunciation school shooting in Minnesota, where 2 children were shot dead as they were praying in a pew. Here's my question. What is the FBI doing to take on this rising tide of violence that seems to be motivated by anti-religious hatred?
Specifically, sir, we have 60 anti-Catholic hate crime incidences reported to us that are being investigated. Publicly, I can tell you we have 5 hate crime investigations with anti-Catholic bias ongoing currently in the states, in the cities of Kansas City, Louisville, Houston, Nashville, and Richmond. That's what I can say publicly, but any ideologically based attack against any faith, as a man of faith myself, will not be tolerated, and the full resources of the FBI are committed to all of it.
Are you investigating any domestic cells that instigate or encourage or fund or in any way support attacks on churches or other houses of worship?
Senator, you raise an incredibly important point that most people don't look at. I've always said we follow the money, and whether it's terrorism or attacks based on ideology or attacks on institutions of faith or people of faith, someone's paying for it, and we are reverse tracing those steps. We are not stopping at the perpetrator themselves. We are reverse engineering to hold those accountable in our investigations to who funded them and knowingly funded them, and we will bring the appropriate steps against them with our partners at DOJ.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. We look forward to hearing reports on that progress. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Let me just ask you this in the same vein, Director. Since the Dobbs decision, the FBI has advertised $25,000 rewards for information on attacks on abortion clinics. Will the FBI similarly offer rewards for information on attacks of houses of worship?
Yes, when it is appropriate. The rewards are any reward, whether it's an attack on a house of faith or on a homicide or whatever, is determined by a group within the FBI, but we will work with them to make sure that rewards of monetary value are put out for all ideologically based attacks.
Good. You just rattled off some statistics, which I was glad to hear, about the number of investigations you have open, the incidents you're tracking against Christians, against houses of worship. Let me just ask you if you consider designating a senior official as a liaison to houses of worship, to Christian and other religious organizations, to publish metrics on investigations and arrests related to church attacks, church threats, vandalism, arson, et cetera. Will you set up a system for liaising and then reporting so that everybody can see, this committee and the public can see just how many attacks we're talking about, just what the level of threat and violence is and what the FBI is doing to combat it?
Senator, you're speaking my language. The private-public sector partnership on this specific issue, just like the other ones we've talked about, is equally transformative to finding those involved in these criminal activities. And with your assistance, I would ask you if you're able to identify someone who's an expert in that area, we will work with them. We will take their information because as great as the FBI is, we're only as good as the information we can get, and we don't have the reach that the private sector does in some of these areas.
Very good. Happy to help on that. Let me ask you about something specific to the FBI, because sadly, as you know, the FBI, when it comes to anti-religious animus, has been part of the problem before you got to this agency. And I know that you remember the infamous memo generated by the FBI that attempted to recruit informants in houses of worship, in particular in Catholic parishes. Your predecessor testified when this information, I just want to reiterate, this memo became public because of a whistleblower. It was not turned over to this committee. It was not disclosed to this committee. In fact, we were told it didn't exist, and then a whistleblower published it, showing that indeed the FBI had recruited informants, attempted to, into Catholic parishes. Your predecessor then testified, sitting right where you are today, he testified that this, I'm going to quote, was a single product by a single field office, end quote. That was a lie. Because we then had additional whistleblowers come forward and say, no, actually, multiple field offices contributed to the drafting of the report. And indeed, there was a second anti-Catholic memo that the FBI generated. And indeed, those memos were distributed to over 1,000 FBI agents across the country. You know all of this. You and I talked about it. when you were here for your confirmation hearing back in January. I just want to follow up and see, have you been able to determine how this memo got written and distributed? How is it that the Federal Bureau of Investigation came to be recruiting informants in Christian churches in this country?
Senator, we did dig in, and we are doing our investigation simultaneously with Congress. And just to put it in perspective, we've provided 700 documents on the Richmond Catholic memo specifically to this committee, whereas my predecessor provided 19 pages. And not only that, but we looked into how the source recruitment structure at the FBI was conducted during this time. And we made adjustments and permanent fixes to ensure that sources are not put into houses of worship unless there is an actual ongoing criminal or international terrorism threat. We will not use sources at this FBI to investigate and cull information just for the sake of culling information in houses of worship.
Has anybody been fired for this?
There have been terminations related to this and resignations.
Good. There need to be, because if this is going to be standard at the FBI, nobody can trust the FBI. You want to talk about violating the First Amendment? This has got First Amendment violation written all over it. It's one of the most revolting chapters in the FBI's history. And considering what we're seeing more broadly in terms of the acts of violence against people of faith, this has absolutely got to end, and the FBI has to lead the way. So I count on you to do that, Director. Let me just, in the minute or so that I have remaining, let me just shift gears and ask you about something else you said earlier. You said that protecting our youth is maybe the FBI's top priority. It's great to hear. Let me ask you about the role of AI chatbots in that, which you've talked about a little bit already today. Are you investigating any cases of AI-generated child sex abuse material? You issued a PSA earlier this year warning that synthetic child sex abuse material, that's where the AI generates it using maybe a real kid's image, but then generates sex material, sex abuse material. You warned that that was illegal under federal law. Is the FBI investigating any instances of this synthetic CSAM material generated by AI that you can speak to?
We are investigating dozens of those matters because, let me just say this, as far as the FBI is concerned, generative AI that produces CSAM, child sexual abuse material, under our investigative authorities is treated as equally as if it were actual child sexual abuse material. There's no difference for me in the FBI on this.
Let me just ask you one other thing in this vein. I'm sure you've seen the reporting that Meta's AI rules, their own internal guidelines, allowed their chatbots to have sensual, that's their word, sensual conversations with children. We've had instances, multiple instances of children, minors, taking their own lives at the behest of chatbots that instructed them with specificity on how to do it. What's the FBI's role here in investigating what is going on with these chatbots, with these AI companies encouraging? I mean, listen, if an actual person did that, we would say that's grooming. We would say that's child abuse. These companies are doing it. Their own guidelines allow it. What can we do about that?
You're referring to NVE, nihilistic violent extremism, and the 764. It has been made a priority of the FBI because they are targeting children, and these chatbots and these generative AI are getting coupled with actual humans who are using them and releasing them because they can do the work faster and quicker than humans can and get into spaces like social media where humans have a difficulty in engaging. And what we're doing is treating any extension of generative AI as the criminal themselves. And we have, I think, I've got to get the number back to you, but over 1,000 investigations related to NVE. We've had numerous takedowns and arrests of 764 individuals. And we are educating, this may be the most important part, I'm directly engaging with the social media and media companies, the internet service providers, to find a way to shut down. There's nothing I can do at the FBI to force them to shut it down, but work with you in Congress to find a way to work with our partners to get that shut down permanently.
Thank you.
Senator Coons.
The second document is a list of Republican groups and people that Arctic Frost targeted, including Charlie Kirk's group, Turning Point USA. These documents show the political weaponization of the Biden administration against Republicans. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Attorney General Bondi, good to see you. Welcome. I've been listening closely in this hearing, and I've heard over and over from my Democrat colleagues concerns about targeting political enemies, and they've accused you of all manner of things and the current president. I've also heard them said, and I just wrote it down because I wanted to be sure I heard it correctly. I've heard them say that Joe Biden never targeted his political enemies. Joe Biden never directed his attorney general to target his political opponents. Huh, that's interesting, because I could have sworn that yesterday we learned that the FBI tapped my phone. Let's look at it. We've got a list. Tapped my phone, tapped Lindsey Graham's phone, tapped Marsha Blackburn's phone, tapped 5 other phones of United States senators. Gee, it sure looks like targeting political opponents to me, and yet I haven't heard a word from that side of the dais about any concern whatsoever. We've got nothing but concerns today, but no concern at all for a Justice Department that is tapping the phones of sitting United States senators because who knows why. They don't like them. They're members of the opposition party. They're Republicans. They're conservatives. You've seen this document, Attorney General Bondi. What was going on here? Who ordered this? Who ordered the tapping of the phones of United States senators?
Senator Hawley, I cannot discuss the details of that right now for very good reason.
You're going to do a thorough investigation into this, I trust. Is that correct?
We will be looking at all aspects of this, and I have talked to Director Patel at length about
And
this.
you're going to figure out who was involved in this, who signed off on it, who knew about it. You're going to get to the bottom of all of it. Is it correct?
Yes, and I've spoken to Director Patel about it, and he is committed to doing this.
Well, I can tell you, we already know many of the details. We already know that this was ordered by the Special Prosecutor Jack Smith, who reported directly to the Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland. And we know that Jack Smith was on his witch hunt because he was directed to do so by the President of the United States, Joe Biden. Let's just remember. Let's take a walk down memory lane. April 2nd, 2022, the New York Times. Garland faces growing pressure. The Times says as recently as late last year, that would have been 2021, Mr. Biden confided to his inner circle he believed former President Trump was a threat to democracy and should be prosecuted. It goes on to say that Biden was frustrated with Garland and wanted him to take decisive action against Trump. Here's what we're talking about. Trump, of course, was a private citizen at the time. So he appoints his own hitman, Jack Smith, who goes after the president, former president, who goes after members of this body. You know, the thing about it, though, that really strikes me is that it didn't stop with members of the United States Senate. Did it, Attorney General Bondi? It didn't stop here at all. I mean, just as egregious, maybe more so than tapping the phones of U.S. senators, is this memo that I know you've seen before. Let's just look at it again. This is an FBI memo from the same time period, I might add, from the same time period, in which the Federal Bureau of Investigation attempts to recruit informants into Catholic parishes in this country. So here you have an administration that is activating the FBI against its political opponents and tapping the phones of United States senators. Can I just say that again for my colleagues, for the benefit of my colleagues on the other side of the dais? Tapping the phones of United States senators. This isn't hypothetical. This isn't maybe what will you do in the future. This isn't, oh, gee, can you imagine a situation? This happened. This happened. And this happened, the targeting of Catholics in this country because Joe Biden and his FBI didn't like Catholics who went to a certain kind of mass. I mean, good God in heaven, what is happening to this country? What happened under Joe Biden? Or then how about this, the infamous school board memo, where Merrick Garland, at the direction of the White House, issued a memo activating the FBI's counterterrorism division against parents who attended school board meetings and had the temerity to ask what their kids were being taught. And some of those parents were treated like this. Let's just remember. Let's remember how parents were treated. Treated like this man. That's right. A parent at a school board meeting, I think in Virginia, who was drug out of the school board meeting. He's bloodied there, you can see it. And what was the response of Joe Biden's DOJ and FBI? It was to issue a memorandum saying that people like this ought to be investigated by the counterterrorism unit. And unbelievably, they were. They were. Or how about this? Let's remember Mark Houck and the pro-lifers who were prosecuted for what? For going to a clinic, an abortion clinic, and praying on a sidewalk outside an abortion clinic. This is Mark Houck and his beautiful family at Mass. This man, at the direction of Joe Biden's FBI, this man had an FBI SWAT team come to his door in the early morning hours with his beautiful children there, terrorizing them with weapons drawn. He was then arrested and prosecuted. And fortunately, a jury acquitted him. This is what was happening under Joe Biden. United States senators spied upon. Former presidents, the political opponents of the president at the time, targeted, prosecuted. Pro-lifers, targeted, prosecuted. Catholics, targeted, prosecuted. 92 conservative organizations put under surveillance, targeted for potential prosecution. Gee, I don't know. Would you call that an example of weaponization, Attorney General Bondi? Do you think that's a fair characterization?
Senator Hawley, that is the ultimate weaponization. And weaponization under Donald Trump has ended. It has ended. Harmeet Dillon is running our civil rights unit, and she is doing an incredible job. No longer will parents be targeted. No longer will parents who care about whether their elementary school children have to read a transgender book be targeted and told they cannot have any say in their child's education. That has ended under this administration. People can worship freely, whether they're Catholics at synagogues or Muslims. Everyone can worship freely. That was the ultimate weaponization. They were targeting Catholics. No longer. They have been targeting so many American citizens throughout this country. And Senator Hawley, you have been a champion of this, and thank you for being a champion of that. But under Donald Trump's watch, it has ended.
You know, I think about some of the abuses of power in this country's history, and there's been, sadly, a lot of them by members of the executive branch over the years, whether it's Watergate, whether it's what J. Edgar Hoover did in his time at the FBI, spying on many public figures, RFK, MLK, JFK, you name it. And I just have to say, what we now know happened in the last 4 years under this administration surpasses all of that. It surpasses all of it. Not just for the interference in the legislative branch, not just for the blatant disregard for the separation of powers, not just for the blatant disregard for the First Amendment, but for the targeting of ordinary American citizens who can't afford lawyers, who can't afford to mount a defense, who when the FBI knocks at their door or comes with the SWAT team, they don't know what to do. It is absolutely a disgrace. It is a stain on the history of this country and on the conscience of this country, what this administration did in the last 4 years. So here's what I think needs to happen. Madam Attorney General, I think we need a special prosecutor to be appointed whose sole responsibility will be to get to the bottom of what has happened in every instance that I have just named. I think we need to know exactly who approved the wiretaps on United States senators, who knew about it, what agents were involved at DOJ or the FBI. I think we need to know exactly who signed off on the Catholic memo, the spying memo, who was involved with it, how far did it go. I think we need to know exactly who authorized the prosecution of Mark Houck, who terrorized pro-lifers and tried to intimidate them. I think we need to know that, Mr. Chairman, this committee needs to do oversight hearings. We need to have thorough hearings into what has happened these last 4 years and this abuse that has now just been uncovered, because we have to ensure that it stops. As you just said, Attorney General Bondi, we have to ensure that it stops. This chapter in American history needs to come to a close, never to be opened again. The use of the most powerful law enforcement bodies in the world against ordinary citizens and political opponents must end once and for all. And we have a chance to do it, and it needs to be done with a thorough investigation, full transparency, and those who violated laws need to be prosecuted. I thank you for what you're doing, Attorney General Bondi. I hope that you will launch a thorough investigation. I hope you'll appoint a special prosecutor. Mr. Chairman, I hope we'll hold hearings. And with that, I yield.
Yeah. Before I call on Blumenthal, I want to, without objection, introduce into the record a document that General Bondi helped to declassify. The document is Array FBI